Breaking now, urgent reports flooding in from the Baltic frontier. Moscow's vital Kaliningrad land bridge has collapsed in chaos, with hundreds of trains grinding to a halt as Belarus slams shut its border crossings. In these tense hours, freight lines that once pulsed like arteries supplying Russia's isolated exclave now sit frozen, engines idling in the biting cold, while whispers from sources on the ground paint a picture of deliberate sabotage or geopolitical brinkmanship gone awry. The world watches breathlessly as this choke point, Russia's only overland lifeline to its western outpost, threatens to unravel supply chains that sustain everything from military outposts to everyday fuel deliveries. Eyewitnesses describe a surreal standoff, locomotives backed up for miles, horns blaring in frustration, as border guards enforce an abrupt lockdown without warning. This isn't just a logistical hiccup, it's a seismic rupture in the heart of Eurasian connectivity, echoing the fragility of post-Cold War borders. But hold on, because what unfolds next could reshape alliances and ignite flashpoints we never saw coming. To stay ahead of this unfolding crisis and catch every twist as it breaks, hit that subscribe button now. We'll dive deeper into the political machinations pulling the strings behind this shutdown. Official statements from the Kremlin pour out in measured tones, insisting the Belarus border closure stems from routine security protocols amid heightened NATO vigilance, yet behind closed doors, sources reveal a stark divergence. President Lukashenko's regime, once Moscow's staunchest ally, now maneuvers with subtle autonomy, delaying reopenings to extract concessions on energy subsidies and military basing rights. In these pivotal hours, the White House issues a terse advisory, framing the shutdown as an internal Russian logistical snag without U.S. involvement, while European Union foreign ministers convene urgently in Brussels, demanding transparency from Minsk on the abrupt halt that severs trade routes vital for over 200,000 tons of annual cargo through this corridor alone. Contradictions abound. Belarusian state media broadcasts assurances of swift resolution within 48 hours, but diplomatic cables intercepted by Western intelligence suggest Lukashenko leverages the crisis to renegotiate debt relief totaling €3 billion from prior loans, pitting loyalty to Moscow against pragmatic survival. Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov counters with veiled accusations of Polish provocation, claiming Warsaw's border patrols exacerbated the jam, though satellite imagery shows no such incursions, only Belarusian forces sealing gates at Grodno and Brest crossings. This political theater unfolds against a backdrop of fractured unity. The Collective Security Treaty Organization, meant to bind Russia and Belarus in ironclad defense, now strains under unspoken resentments, with Minsk quietly courting neutral stances from Astana and Yerevan to dilute Moscow's dominance. Governments react in waves. Beijing observes silently, wary of precedents that could unsettle its own border dynamics with neighbors, while Ankara signals support for Russia through back-channel talks, offering alternative Black Sea routes to bypass the impasse. The rift deepens as Kaliningrad's governor appeals directly to the Federal Center for Emergency Airlifts, bypassing Minsk entirely, a move that underscores eroding trust in the Union State Pact signed 15 years ago. Official rhetoric clashes with reality. Moscow pledges unwavering solidarity, yet dispatches envoys to negotiate bilaterally, revealing the land bridge's fragility as a pawn in a larger chess game of influence and dependence. Here, the contrast sharpens. Words of alliance mask a scramble for leverage, where every delayed train represents a bargaining chip in the high-stakes diplomacy reshaping Eastern Europe's power balance. But this only scratches the surface of the tensions brewing on the ground. Tensions ignite on the frozen frontier. Belarusian armored units roll into position at the Grodno crossing, sealing off the rail hub with razor wire and concrete barriers, stranding 370 freight cars loaded with ammunition crates destined for Kaliningrad's fortified bases. In this accelerating storm, Russian paratroopers from the airborne forces deploy reconnaissance drones over the border zone, scanning for signs of NATO encroachment, while fighter jets from Smolensk streak low across the skies, their afterburners roaring in a show of unyielding resolve. The rhythm quickens, ground crews scramble to reroute military convoys through secondary paths, but mud-slicked roads in the November chill bog down 25 heavy transporters carrying Iskander missile systems, vital for the exclave's defensive perimeter that guards against potential Baltic incursions. Sources on the line report frantic radio chatter. Belarusian officers, under orders from Minsk, halt inbound patrols from the Western Military District, citing protocol breaches, yet satellite feeds capture unauthorized vehicle movements, 42 troop carriers edging closer to the Lithuanian frontier, heightening fears of spillover into contested zones. The pulse races. Kaliningrad's garrison activates emergency protocols, mobilizing 5,000 reservists to secure the ports, where naval frigates now idle with missile bays primed, ready to counter any blockade attempts from the sea. Short bursts of urgency crackle through, a single cargo train attempts a breakthrough, only to face armed standoffs at the tracks, guards with rifles drawn, engines revving in standoff. Moscow dispatches elite Spetsnaz teams via air to assess the jam, their helicopters chopping through the night, while Belarus counters with artillery spotters repositioning along the rail lines, a move that could transform logistics snarl into live-fire confrontation. The tempo surges, over 200 kilometers of track lie paralyzed, exposing vulnerabilities in Russia's supply chain that once funneled 1 million tons of fuel and munitions annually through this vein, now a powder keg where one wrong signal could spark clashes. Eyewitnesses from the border posts describe the scene, floodlights piercing the darkness, soldiers in fur-lined coats barking orders, the distant thunder of tank treads as reinforcements converge from both sides. This isn't mere delay, it's a military chessboard tilting toward crisis, with threats of escalation hanging like storm clouds. Warsaw heightens alert levels, deploying 2 squadrons of F-16 fighters to patrol the skies, while Vilnius scrambles its air defenses, radars locking onto Russian signals probing the edges. The drama builds relentlessly, Belarusian sappers mine secondary routes, delaying any flanking maneuvers, forcing Moscow to consider bold alternatives like amphibious insertions across the Baltic, a gambit that risks widening the theater. In the heat of this standoff, every halted locomotive echoes the specter of broader conflict, where the land bridges fall could ignite a chain reaction along the NATO flank. But hold the line, because the economic shockwaves from this military gridlock are already rippling far beyond the tracks. Global markets convulse in the wake of this border lockdown. Crude oil futures spike by 12% on the London Exchange as Kaliningrad's stranded tankers disrupt 2 million barrels of refined product rerouted through Belarusian lines each quarter, forcing Moscow to tap emergency reserves that drain $1 billion from federal coffers in mere days. The scale expands coldly, European natural gas prices surge 15% in Amsterdam, with pipelines from the Yamal route facing bottlenecks that could shave 100 billion cubic meters from annual supplies to Germany and Poland, where factories in the Ruhr Valley already idle 20,000 workers amid fears of winter blackouts. Beijing voices quiet alarm through state channels, its steel mills in Hebei province staring down a shortfall of 500,000 tons of Russian iron ore monthly, prompting frantic searches for Australian alternatives that inflate costs by 25% and strain the Belt and Road corridors snaking through Central Asia. In this vast economic web, the land bridges paralysis halts over 1,000 freight wagons carrying semiconductors and machinery worth €3 billion yearly, crippling Kaliningrad's assembly plants that produce components for Europe's automotive giants, from Volkswagen in Wolfsburg to Renault in Paris, where assembly lines grind to a halt, idling 15,000 jobs across the continent. Brussels demands immediate briefings from Minsk, estimating the shutdown's toll at €500 million in lost trade per week, while Warsaw activates contingency funds totaling 2 billion zlotys to bolster Polish ports as overflow hubs, yet even these measures falter as shipping rates balloon 40% for Baltic routes now choked with diverted vessels. The cold calculus deepens, Russia's central bank intervenes with 1 trillion rubles in liquidity to steady the ruble, which plummets 8% against the dollar, exposing the exclave's dependence on subsidized rail flows that once moved 8 million tons of grain and fertilizer southward, now rotting in sidings and threatening food security in allied states like Armenia and Kazakhstan. Ankara steps in with opportunistic bids, offering to transship 1 million tons of cargo via the Caspian Sea at premiums of 30%, a lifeline that underscores shifting alliances as Turkey eyes discounted energy deals to offset its own inflation hovering at 70%. Further afield, New Delhi halts orders for Russian arms components valued at $800 million, rerouting through Iranian ports that add weeks to delivery and inflate costs by 18%. While Seoul's shipyards face delays in steel deliveries, stalling contracts worth $4 billion and rippling into consumer electronics prices worldwide. International reactions cascade. The International Monetary Fund warns of a 1% drag on Eastern European growth if the impasse lingers beyond 72 hours, with ripple effects hitting global supply chains for rare earths extracted in the Urals and funneled through this vein. In the grand scope, this isn't isolated fallout, it's a geopolitical earthquake reshaping trade blocs, where the frozen tracks symbolize fractured dependencies, forcing realignments that could cost the Eurasian Economic Union up to $10 billion in cumulative losses by year's end. Yet amid this frozen expanse of figures and forecasts, the true weight presses on the human element, the fragile threads binding our shared world. In the quiet aftermath of this frozen standoff, we confront the profound question: what does the vanishing of Moscow's Kaliningrad land bridge truly signify for a world already teetering on edges of division? This rupture strips bare the illusions of unbreakable ties, revealing how a single border's closure can unravel the threads of security that billions rely upon, from the factory worker in Gdansk staring at empty shelves to the farmer in Siberia watching crops wither without rail lifelines. Psychologically, it etches a scar of vulnerability across nations. Russians in the exclave, isolated by geography and now by politics, grapple with a deepening sense of encirclement, where every stalled train amplifies whispers of abandonment, fostering a collective anxiety that could harden into resolve or despair, affecting over 1 million residents who once felt the pulse of the mainland just a journey away. For Belarusians, the act of sealing gates sows internal doubt. Loyalty to Moscow clashes with the fear of economic isolation, as families in Minsk ponder the cost of autonomy in a union that demands blind obedience, potentially fracturing the social fabric that has held through decades of shared hardships. Globally, the psychological toll ripples outward. Europeans awaken to the fragility of their peace dividend, with polls in Berlin and Warsaw showing 60% now viewing Russian borders as active threats, stirring a philosophical reckoning on interdependence. Do we cling to globalization's promise, or retreat into fortified silos that echo the Cold War's iron divisions? This moment pauses us to reflect on the human cost beneath the numbers: the truck driver idling for days, his dreams of home deferred, or the soldier on watch, heart pounding at shadows of escalation, embodying the existential weight of choices made in distant halls of power. What does it mean for us, ordinary souls in an extraordinary storm? It signals a pivot toward uncertainty, where trust erodes like thawing permafrost, leaving societies to question if alliances forged in fire can withstand the chill of self-interest. Philosophically, this crisis invites a deeper gaze. In a world of finite resources and infinite ambitions, the land bridge's fall underscores the illusion of control, reminding us that borders are not just lines on maps but barriers to empathy, capable of igniting cycles of retaliation that span generations. Yet herein lies the gravitas. Amid the pause, we sense history's hinge turning, a call to vigilance against the drift toward isolationism that could engulf economies and psyches alike. To grasp how this psychological undercurrent might propel us into uncharted tomorrows and not miss the revelations ahead, subscribe now and join the watch. Everything, it seems, is just beginning. The true test of resilience awaits in the shadows beyond the tracks.